Let me say a few words about our next speaker, Jason Warner. Jason is the managing director at Redpoint Ventures, a venture capital firm that has invested in thousands of aspiring entrepreneurs over the last 2 decades. Jason previously served as GitHub's chief technology officer. Jason is passionate about building technologies that bring people together, and he's an active speaker, writer, and advisor. Jason's talk is titled Jason Warner, an entrepreneur's story. Please help me welcome Mr. Warner.
Everybody. So I'm Jason Warner. I'm a VC now, but before this, I was the CTO at GitHub for 4 years. So 2 years pre-Microsoft acquisition, 2 years post. Anyone use GitHub here? Okay, so then before GitHub, I was also the CTO at Heroku, which is a platform as a service now owned by Salesforce. And before that was the same thing at Canonical, the people who make Ubuntu Linux. So my background is pretty straightforward, which is just developers, platforms, and kind of big scale distributed systems of public clouds. I'm also a grad at Penn State. I went here from 95 to 99 in the CS program, back when all the CS stuff was in Pond Lab, and I don't think that's actually a thing anymore for the computer science program here. Yeah, I don't have any prepared remarks or anything to go through. I was just hoping to answer questions or talk about topics that might be interesting to people. So if people want to just like rapid fire questions, I'm really happy to do that. Or I could just tell stories about GitHub going through the sale of Microsoft and stuff. So yeah, you over there. Sure. So for the folks listening, I'm supposed to repeat the question. So what did I do at Penn State that prepared me? I don't know if I did anything really here at Penn State that prepared me. I was one of those super boring students. I did not grow up well off. School was expensive even back then for me. So I just took as many credits as I possibly could to get out of here as quickly as I could. So I took an internship, took 28 and 27 credits my first year, at AP credits coming in. Like that's all I really did. What I did at the same time though is I did internships. I had one at MITRE in Virginia. I had one at IBM. And what I really tried to figure out was how to develop software in the real world. And developing software in the real world is very different than taking a CS program or studying to become a computer science graduate, which is all algorithms and things of that nature. So I tried to understand what I was learning and how it was going to apply to the real world because they're not necessarily the same thing. Yeah. What did I first learn in my first role as CTO and change as subsequent roles, essentially? So just like anything you're doing in life, you think you might have an idea of what X is until you actually do it, and then you're like, oh shit, I was completely wrong about that. I thought I had to be the singular most technical person in the company, and I happened to be in some cases, but every time I didn't have an answer to something, I got massively nervous. Like if I didn't understand what was happening, or I thought, oh shit, I'm over my head type of deal. That's not the case. The job of a CTO is to make stuff happen, and it's to make sure the right decisions are happening at the right time for the right reasons. And so all I really had to do is understand that instead of having the answer, I had to know which questions to ask. Why are we doing this? Walk me through your thought process. Keep me understanding about what we're doing and how we're going to achieve that success. When I kept advancing and kept going on to bigger and bigger roles, it was pretty interesting to see my own transition into becoming eventually the GitHub CTO. When instead of saying, hey, we should go do X, Y, and Z from a technology perspective, I talked about customers way more. I talked about the products we're building, why we're building them, and how we're going to measure the success of those. And I happen to have staff engineers or chief engineers who were reporting to me, and we were all around the same age, we were all around the same experience level. And I would say, my job here is to figure out what we're going to go build, why we're going to build it, and who we're going to build it for. And your job is to tell me, no, Jason, you're insane on that timeline, and here's the reasons. And because of our experiences, we can match up. And I'm going to say, nope, we're going to go do X, and we're going to forget about Y. So prioritization. And I became a lot more confident in myself to go do that. And you always get more confident with success and repeated success. And that was really the big change. I think it was like this lack of confidence, lack of self-awareness, maybe insecurity, to extreme confidence, extreme reliance on like, your own gut instinct as opposed to like, well, let me go bang out code on the weekend and figure out if this is a thing or not. So you had a lot more confidence in that way. Yeah. The succession? Sure, I can walk you through my history. So my path to CTO essentially is the question. So I graduated from Penn State. I went back to Connecticut, where I'm from, and I joined IBM, and I was working on the 2000 Olympics system at IBM, and I realized I didn't want to work at IBM anymore. So I joined a startup that was doing video streaming on the internet. This was back in 1999. I don't think anyone here was born. Anyone here was born in 1999? Yeah, this makes me feel really old really quickly. 99 was a tough time to do video streaming on the internet because most people could only watch videos on the internet in their office. Like the broadband to the home was not a big thing. That company went out of business, and my wife was in medical school, and I decided that I needed to go get a stable job. So the stable job I joined in January of 2001 was Enron. And I quickly learned that there was not a lot of security in corporate life unless you make your own security. And that, after Enron went out of business, I realized like, whatever, you're just gonna have to go make your own path. So wife finished medical school and moved out to Arizona, and I joined a security company there that was a startup. I had a choice between Google and this engineer number 2 at a startup company. And I took the startup company as an engineer number 2, and then quickly became head of engineering, then VP of engineering there. After that, I joined Canonical, where I ran all of Ubuntu, so Ubuntu desktop, server, phone. After Ubuntu was Heroku, where I joined as director of engineering, and then eventually took over everything. And then GitHub was, technically my title at GitHub was SVP of technology and then CTO. So I would say that I programmed for, let's just say my entire career is a 20-year period. I programmed hardcore for 10 years, and the last 10 was all leadership. Yes.
What according to you is the most exciting development in computer science from the industry?
What's the most exciting thing? There's no question, or there's no answer to this question that does not say AI. I think there's 3 fundamental technologies on the planet that will change the course of everything: fusion, quantum, and AI. And AI is the only one I can understand, so it's the one that I'm going to get involved with. And the last product I incubated at GitHub was a product called GitHub Copilot. I'm not sure if anyone here uses that or not, but that was the first major generative AI that was available on the market. We started incubating that, and I want to say it was 2020, and the beta was released in 2021 and went GA in 2022. But I think the large language models are effectively the future, and all of those are, that's where I spend almost all my time now, is on that side. I'm an infrastructure investor, but AI is really where I spend almost all my time. Yes. This is interesting because I think you have to learn about the business way sooner as a CTO. Like everyone thinks that they're going to be a CTO of something like a GitHub, which was 1,000 people when we sold it, and when I left, GitHub was 3,500 people. Like, oh, I'm working on the most awesome tech, which is true. I was incubating Copilot, so I'm talking to that team on a regular basis. But I'm also, I flew out to IBM because the customer IBM was about to churn. They're our largest customer. They were so angry at us when I first joined GitHub because of something we did wrong. So I literally, 9 a.m., the first day I joined GitHub, I was on a call with all of IBM's leadership, like begging them not to leave and give me 6 months to prove that we could do this in 3 weeks. I was going to have this working. In 6 more weeks, I was going to have this working, and that sort of thing. So it's a lot more customer focused than you expect, and a lot more caring about metrics than, I'm sure a lot of us in this room are all data driven, but it's understanding the depth of those things and what matters. So like just looking at a dashboard is one thing, and everything's going up and to the right, or I guess to you guys, up and to the right this way. That's great, but understanding what moves those metrics, what really matters there, versus the day-to-day, which is when you actually get to, okay, we're going to tweak this or change that, or go build the system start to finish, and you get a lot more involved in technology. There's a couple of people at GitHub who I think of on a regular basis as their staff engineers, and again, similar in age and experience, and my day and their days were very different, but we were always in the same meetings. So we were in those meetings talking about those products, and I'm sitting there thinking, okay, how is this going to move the business? What's our ARR going to look like? How are our customers going to feel about this when this rolls out? What's our go-to-market plan? How are we going to message this? All that sort of stuff. And then this one guy named Patrick, who I love to death, he was like, don't worry your pretty little head, Jason, we'll handle all the details. I'm like, thank God, because I just don't have the time for that. And that was effectively the difference. Now, in a different life, maybe I would have been having the fun programming, but it just wasn't to be. You can have the same amount of fun doing the other side, but you have to worry about very different things. Yes.
What was the one leadership thing you learned about
I don't think there's any one, or what were the lesson, or the one lesson I learned?
biggest one?
Well, so I think there's 4 fundamental constraints in the entire world for all people, all companies, all entities, and it's money, ideas, time, and people. And if you think about those all the way through, money, for the most part, we can get that in the world if you have a good enough idea. And ideas are pretty prevalent once you actually have an established company. There's ideas everywhere how to improve it or how to advance it. And time is constant for all of us as it moves at the same pace. So the real job of all of leadership is to find the right people to work on those ideas in a time, cost-effective manner. So one of the superpowers that I feel like I've developed over time is the ability to identify people who can move things forward. And the whole goal of startups is to find people that you don't have to give every single instruction to. So to flip it around, if I could offer and impart upon everybody here, is to anticipate problems your bosses have is a great way to advance quickly. Because if you're anticipating one extra problem that they don't ever have to think about in their life, you've just taken a whole bunch of burdens off their plate. And I'm thinking about this. One of my best friends was the head of infrastructure at GitHub when I joined. He's now running a company called Planet Scale. He has a CEO. And I remember one meeting with him when I just had all of these things. GitHub was on fire all over the place. We didn't have any, all the founders had left the business, and it was just me running everything. And I was just like, things are on fire. I feel like I'm at my wit's end. This guy's name is Sam, came into the room and said, hey, just so you know, we had an outage in the data center, but we caught it. It's fixed, and here's the remediation step. You don't have to worry about it, but make sure that this is accounted for in the budget. And he said, I already talked to the CFO as well, and he understands, so all you have to do is go approve it. And I was like, I stood up and I gave him a hug. And I was like, I don't know what to do, Sam, but I just thank you so much. That would have been one more thing that I would have to go think about. And no one wants to think about an outage on top of that. But that type of approach, is just wonderful. So if you ever want to advance in your career, solve at least one or two of your boss's problems they don't even know they have. Yes. Yeah. How do I better build intuition? I don't think there's any way to do that other than reps. And I talk about running a business as being similar to like being on a sports team or whatever. The more shots you take, the better you're going to understand your own mechanics. The more times you take a shot on the floor at a very specific spot, the more confident you'll be able to take it in the game. If anyone here is a big sports fan, they always talk about practices should be more intense than the game. Because if you practice at such an intensity level and with such conviction and dedication, when you're fatigued in a game, you don't have the same sort of mental capacity to think through all those things. It just has to almost be on autopilot. It's kind of the same thing in running a business. So what I used to do, I never lived in San Francisco. So I took the time when I was leaving San Francisco on the flights to decompose all of my time in San Francisco into notebooks. And I would then go through and game plan different scenarios. And I would repeat that every day. I would go back through and say, well, if this happens, if this customer does this or this thing happens. And I would constantly be ready to do that so that when one of those things does go wrong, it was almost like my practice and my repetition. And eventually you get to the point where you don't have to actively do that anymore. It's more passive. You just have the ability to passively understand what might happen next. And so, when I was younger, I'd have to sit in a room and say, well, I think the knock-on effect of this decision is going to be one of these three different divergent branches. So therefore, let me work through each of these three divergent branches with each of those effects. I no longer have to do that. I have to say, odds on are it's going to be this one, and here's how I'm going to tell if we're on that path and what we're going to do about it. And if that's not true, we're going to know in 2 weeks because I'm going to measure this metric. And that's all based upon the reps. Yes, in the back. I've stopped using Java. I mean, the one thing I'll say is that everything since 2000 has changed multiple times. And so the most important thing I think you can do from a technical standpoint is understand why X, Y, or Z was important or what it does. You don't have to know like the specific techniques. And I remember a time when, and this date myself and no one here will understand this, but like Java was super in vogue and J2EE was a thing. And they had all these books written about like design patterns. And people were trying to learn these things called design patterns and apply them to the code base. And even I did that. And that was a failure. It's like kind of blindly applying a principle without understanding the why behind something that was important. So now that I understand a lot more why and like how to apply that, I can understand like what Vercel is doing from the earliest days, or what Replit is trying to achieve, or why Rust is important and what it's trying to do. And now I can also dive into a language or a framework or whatever and understand really quickly this pattern looks this way, and this technique is doing this, and understand how they'll apply. The most adaptive principle for me has been, I was a back-end engineer, so distributed systems, and building very large distributed systems helped me understand how all these various systems would interact in a loosely coupled sort of way. Understanding that for whatever reason unlocked the business side and the technology side, because I no longer had to like have tight coupling. I can have kind of loose coupling, and that allowed me to like really keep up to speed. I wouldn't say that I could dive into any one language right now. Like my go, and I could dive into Python and code, but I can also jump into Ruby with just a little bit of effort, because I understand how the differences between the two, as well as Rust or Go or whatever. Now, I won't be the best engineer, but at least I could be productive. And that also applies to the business side too. I'll go over here. He didn't ask yet, and then I'll come back. So I can't be fired anymore, so I can talk freely about this one. So I would say that GitHub was a special place. It had a special place in the world. It had a special culture. There was a lot to like about it, but it also was special in a bad way too. There was a lot of bad habits that were built up in practices. And in some ways, Microsoft solidified much of the good and helped us get rid of some of the bad. And that was for a very special period of time. But also, with all acquisitions, you start to be absorbed into the larger entity. And with that, you start to almost amalgamate some of their bad habits. And all companies have both good and bad habits. And part of the bad habits that we started to take on from the Microsoft side of the world were we overstaffed and we got slow. And I would say that you just have to be cognizant of those sorts of things and be explicit. Now, I would say that the acquisition was still a great thing for Microsoft, or for GitHub in general, but it's an even better one for Microsoft. If I could do it all over again, I wouldn't undo it, but I would resist a little bit more of the tight coupling that we kind of went through post-acquisition. Also, Microsoft's money was awesome. It was we tried to build. When I joined GitHub, we built GitHub Actions as the very first thing that we built, if anyone's familiar with it, which is a workflow CI-based system. And we couldn't build that pre-acquisition. It cost us $65 million to build that because of how much compute we had to use to build CI. And it was economically infeasible to do pre-acquisition. So we built something that didn't do all the basic CI stuff. Post-acquisition, they literally said, "What do you need?" And I said, $100 million. And they said, "Great, here you go." Like, cool. And then they said, what do you want to build next? I'm like, it's a AI system. We're going to need like $250 million. So like, that's fine. Here you go. Here's all our GPUs. It's like, holy shit, this is amazing. So you can't undersell how much money large entities like that have and what it unlocks too. Sorry, you had a question then too.
Did your outlook change on AI, like after becoming a technically full time, working with GitHub and taking project, and if it did, how, and if not?
The question is, did my outlook on AI change?
AI infrastructure.
Yeah, yes, it did. And the reason why I think it changed, though, has nothing to do with acquisition or any of those things. It has to do with moment in time. So the transformers were a revolution, and OpenAI did one thing better than anything else for the industry, which is it proved that large language models work. And up until, I would say 2020, 2019, it was still unknown how good these things were going to be. And once that happened, you started to realize that these will become what we thought they could. But that was the first time that we actually saw in practice. Everything else was theoretical before that. And so once that happened, you start to realize the unlock. It just so happens it costs an amazing amount of money to get to that point. Yes.
What would be the key roles you would look at for hiring?
What would be the key attributes, essentially, of a CTO? So CTO is an interesting role because it is very stage dependent, I think. And there's very few people that can go from founding CTO with 2 people or 3 people all the way to public company CTO as the role changes. So let's just talk about maybe the different attributes along the way. But let's say you're a founding CTO. It's really about pace. You got to get code, producing an actual effective product, recruiting the team, making sure it's a stellar group of people, inspiring them, but really getting this thing out the door. At some point, you transition to you're running a couple thousand person company, public or private still, and it's about making sure you got the right people in the right seats. You're building the right, you're anticipating problems. You're seeing, hey, we want to build this thing out 3 years from now. We think the world will look this way in 5 years. Are we investing in infrastructure? Are we investing in certain primitives along the way that will allow us to unlock those things? Or how much of the world do we want to change on our own? So it's a lot more forethought in that. You don't have time for that if you're a 2-person company and you haven't proven the product yet. You have to get that out the door. At some point, you have to take a step back and say, I need to be out of the day-to-day code, and I need to be in the year-to-year, infra level type investments. And that if you take that all the way out to Microsoft level, Kevin Scott is the Microsoft CTO, and he was an acquisition. He was a LinkedIn CTO, and prior to that, I think he was the DoubleClick CTO, which was acquired into Google. The only thing that Kevin has cared about for the past 5 years is AI. He's the one who brought the OpenAI partnership in. He doesn't care about what I did at GitHub. He doesn't care what LinkedIn's doing. He only cared about Microsoft making investments in data centers and GPUs and building their own silicon and all that sort of stuff. He was so focused on 10-year out AI type of stuff. That's where his head was at. So it's a very different type of job based upon stage. But as you're growing in your career, I would say, anticipating with problems, getting stuff out the door really quickly, and really understanding how to push pace. And recruiting. Recruiting never ends. You always have to recruit the best people. What would be the one key thing? Again, probably not one key thing, but you have to make sure that the person wants to do the job that you're hiring them for, 1, and 2, is capable of being a person who's very additive to the team. Stages, again, matter here. You're hiring somebody as a core engineer at a 1,000-person company versus a 10-person company. It drastically differs. But at the end of the day, there's a couple of things that don't matter outside of skill set. One is kind of like internal drive. Do they anticipate? Do they know? Are they inquisitive? Are they curious? And the other is probably going to be some sort of self-drivenness. One of the last things you can do in any company is try to have to dictate and say, hey, you need to go do X, you need to go do Y, you need to go do Z. and then I'm going to come back and we're going to make sure you did all those things. It just doesn't work that way. So if you have a set of people that all need to be told what to go do, it's a mishire, like, because that doesn't take anything off my plate. But if there's a set of people who are anticipating those things and kind of, internal ownership of this, then it's almost always a great hire. People always ask the question, like, do you need, domain specificity, or do you need to know X, Y, or Z language? Or I wrote this in Java and they only know C# or Go or whatever. Those are secondary to me typically. I want to find a person who's really going to own and learn and adapt. And if you project out 5 years from now, any of those disqualifying criteria, like, hey, they didn't know Java, they only knew C#, none of those are going to matter, because as the question asked, languages and technologies change. Did they make the place better? Were they one of those people that, were they one of the reasons why the company got more and more successful? Ultimately, you're trying to drive to that. Over here, you didn't ask a question yet. So I have a particular problem with venture in that I've been doing this job for 20 years, and I still think a lot about what I would do with that company or product if I saw it. And that's a bad spot for a venture capitalist to be, because we're not hands-on anymore. So that company, those founders, that team has to be the ones that build it. So I have to ask more questions and understand what their vision is. And are they capable of building this? Do they have the grit and grind to kind of push that through? And I have to suspend whatever product thinking I have, or product strategy or company strategy, and listen to them. And that's something that's hard to turn off for me personally. So I think that's one of my biggest challenges. And the other, I would say, is understanding that I think it's understanding that every person who is telling a story post hoc from a venture capitalist perspective is lying and been a bullshitter for the past 20 years. All of these stories look great in post hoc. We invested in the Airbnb team because we got the vision. That vision changed 8 times along the way, and a lot of it has to do with luck. So what you're actually trying to do is identify the core team and whether or not you think that team is effectively capable of greatness. And so it goes back to recruiting. It's all about people evaluation. So I have to suspend on one side and get almost purely into people evaluation. There are 2 questions back over here.
At the scale that your company's operating, to incorporate data science into choosing which companies to fund or not fund, or ideas that
At various stages, you would involve analysis. At the earliest stage, you don't. So like, let's call it pre-seed, seed, and A, you typically don't involve that much analysis. It's more about, hey, is this a real problem? Is there a market for this? Do we think that the customers really are going to gravitate to this? And then you have to ask the question, what is the terminal outlook of this company? Do we think that it can capture enough of the market or create enough of the market? On the B+ stage, you have a lot more metrics, and so you can dive in. You can say, hey, what's the growth rate? Is it actually trending in the right way? Churn, a bunch of those types of metrics. And they do matter, but even so, you still have to say, okay, we have a limited set. There's only 10,000 users still, so all metrics look great when that's law of small numbers, but what's it going to look like at a large number? So there is some suspending of, leap of faith still. Now, if you're talking about like pre-IPO rounds, that's all analysis. No one even talks about product strategy. You just look at a spreadsheet. Yeah.
What do you say to startups that might build a product, but then down the road there might be a giant company like Microsoft or Google or Apple, where with their hundreds of thousands of engineers just quickly whip up something, and then with their superior distribution strategies wipe them out the water? I mean, Notion is really great. Microsoft just released
Yeah.
their new version of Notion. So what do you say to those startups that have to build that competitive edge?
So one of the things I never worried about when I was building startups is competition. I always worried about customers. So I usually tell people to focus on customers, what the customer needs are. Now, as a technologist, it pains me to say this, but distribution is the #1 thing. So Microsoft has the best sales team in the world by far, hands down, not even a debate. So Microsoft wants to, they will crush you. They will just bring that price down to zero, like they did with Teams and Slack. And if your only thing is your product as it stands today and it's static, you're screwed because distribution will kill you. But if your product is here, but your in development thinking is out here already, you have a chance. And that's why pace matters. You just have to outpace them. Now, at some point, you can't outpace better distribution. So what you have to do is start playing the distribution game too. So one of the strategies I had at GitHub was I never actively worked with Amazon. I went and talked to them, but I never signed them up as a partner because I needed Microsoft, Google, IBM, and Oracle to not care about what I was doing. I needed them to care about Amazon. So I signed up all the number 2s, number 3s, number 4s, and bandied together to all get them quote unquote competitive against Amazon. So I use their distribution engines as well. And that was an amazing thing. So you can't outspend Microsoft or outdistribute Microsoft. You have to play a slightly different game. And this is ultimately like why some of these startups will fail. They try to do everything themselves, go it alone. Like take a multifaceted strategy, outpace them from a product perspective, outdistribute them because you've got like a cabal of people that are working with you because they want to go against them as well. Sign up 2 through 10 as your partners and let them co-sell your product, things of that nature. There's a bunch of different ways in which you can do that. But if you go head to head against Microsoft in every single way, you're only going to have pace and product, and eventually they could just bring that down to zero, and then you're in trouble. Sorry, I thought, yeah. Do I only look to invest in startups and technology? My primary focus is infrastructure. So DevTools infrastructure, databases, AI, things of that nature. That's my expertise, and that's what I feel most comfortable investing in. Redpoint is a generalist fund. We have 8 partners. I would say 6 of us focus on security, enterprise, infra, things of that nature. We have 1 consumer and 1 health tech as well. But we kind of have a special, all of us kind of have a specialty. Other folks? Yes. Well, I think what is the best career path to VC? I think there's a couple of different ways in which you can do it. You could become a lifelong investor. You go to investment banking to start, typically, get an MBA, go work at a venture firm, work your way up, go associate all the way up to principal and partner, and then become a general partner. That's a pretty tried and true path. A lot of our folks, a lot of the folks in Silicon Valley have done that. The other is in industry. That's mine. So I worked at CTO, CPO, then made the jump over. And then the other is founder. You know, found your own thing, do 1, do 2, have a successful exit or semi-successful, and then join as a firm. I don't think there's any one best path that has to do with how you want to your skill set, what you have a desire to go do. I do think that the easiest one is to build your way up, like join a venture firm and build your way up, because one, you're already in venture, so you just have to figure out how to, career ladder just like anywhere else you would. I tend to think that the most enjoyable is to be in industry, do that, and then you have all the experience and learnings from that side of the fence, then you can apply it over here. The venture side of the world is actually really simple. It's really easy to learn. And this over here is harder because it actually involves a lot of time. I tend to, maybe confirmation bias on my own path, but I tend to like that side of the fence. And I think that most people who do enjoy venture into their 40s and 50s were on that side of the fence. I don't. I mean, a lot of very successful investors never worked in industry at all. They're lifelong VCs. So I don't think any one thing is necessary to do. At least 2 of our folks at Redpoint, and I know a lot of folks at other very successful firms have never once worked in industry, or very minorly. They worked as one engineer or a product manager or whatever, and then they jumped over to the venture side of the fence and then worked their way up over there. I just think it looks different from what you would probably lean on as a strength. If you grow up in venture, you're going to lean on market analysis, where the world is going, all the classic MBA type things. If you're jumping from the other side, the operator side of the fence or the founder side of the fence, you've got more intuition and you probably seek out a very specific vertical. So that's like why I'm infrastructure, is because that's my vertical. I fully understand it. And very few other people on the planet would probably understand what's going to happen in AI over the next 5 years. So I can probably anticipate some of that stuff. I don't have a preference in working with them because I think they all have a lot of positives and negatives and great attributes to add. I will say that, again, like I know how to build a company. Most lifelong investors don't know how to build a company. What they're going to do is they're going to throw metrics at you. At your stage, your ratios of product to engineering to finance to sales should look like this. If you asked me that question, I would have no idea. But I would tell you intuitively, like, it's time for us to go build a sales team. But I couldn't tell you what the ratio of sales to BDR to all that other stuff is. I have no idea, but I'd just quickly Google it and figure it out. Yep. Oh, over there. Yeah. So how do people view AI early? So I would say that AI has gone through several different summers and winters. In 2017, we had a wave of AI that was done right around then. Almost every single company in that span has been acquired in some sort of small acquisition. Typically, it was just too early for it to be generally applicable as a standalone entity. But a lot of the greatest innovations that we're seeing these days came out of that genre, that era of AI. So I would say everyone has been very bullish on it. But the longer you've been in industry, the more jaded you are too, because you've seen a couple of different failure cycles of this. Now, the classic last words of this time it'll be different. Almost everyone who is still jaded about maybe previous generations of AI does think that this cycle is very, very different. What you see before too is you saw very industry vertical specific types of AI, like very specific ones, like, hey, we're going to use this on medical imaging only, or we're going to use this on sales funnel analysis only. Now they're becoming like broadly more applicable. So I would say that for the most part, any general technologist has been very interested in AI, but now we understand how it can apply to almost any business across the board. Yes, Nish. Sorry, what was the last word? Oh, for the entrepreneurs. So what advice I have? I think it goes back to the exact same thing I said before, which is if your goal is to say, hey, I want to join a Microsoft level entity and work my way up to be a C level up there in 20 years or something like that, it's not that different. It's just maybe you have to have a little bit more of one attribute, which is patience, because things take longer inside larger organizations. But it is anticipating problems, like anticipating what the next problem set is going to be, seeing opportunities and going after it, sticking your neck out, which is a big deal in startups, but is also a big deal in established companies, saying, I'm going to take on this project and deliver it. And one of the things I didn't mention already is across the board, I think being pleasant to work with is a skill and an attribute that matters a lot, and it matters very deeply in larger established companies. Because one of the things that established companies have that startups don't have typically is if you get so large, you are effectively like 5 or 6 different federated nations. And if you're a person that's welcome in all different federated nations because you're pleasant to work with and people want to work with you, you have more opportunity to work your way up and to have successful impact. But again, anticipating problems, seeing a big picture, sticking your neck out, grabbing something, running with it. And no matter, entrepreneur or intrapreneur, you have to have success along the way. You've got to be able to say, I delivered this, I took this project on and I fixed it. The fastest path anywhere, for what it's worth, is not a net new greenfield thing that gets done, it's almost always a turnaround. And this goes 10 times inside of large companies, because a lot of large companies have very, say mediocre execution and maybe underwhelming delivery. If you could go in and turn something around and very much impress the higher ups, you'll make a name for yourself overnight. So turnarounds are a very simple way to make an impression. Yes. Well, I think it has to do, I mean, there's a bunch of very personal things. I think everyone has to decide on those things. For me, when I was younger, I thought IBM moved too slow. That's what the primary reason I left. I wanted to make more money. I wanted to have bigger impact. I wanted to have more influence. I was too young to know that. I was too stupid to understand what I was doing at that point. As I got I got older and I joined Microsoft or Salesforce. Salesforce acquired Heroku. Microsoft acquired GitHub. I never jumped over to Salesforce and I never jumped over to Microsoft. And I did that on purpose because one, it is a different game that you're playing. Like all those attributes I mentioned before to Nish about succeeding are true. But at the highest level, if you really want to, if I wanted to become the Microsoft CTO, which is a possible path for me, I would also have to play a political game. And I had no interest whatsoever in playing any sort of a political game. And this has to go with a little bit of hubris, but also a little bit of success and a little, like with success, you think you don't have to deal with certain levels of bullshit. And I just decided I did not want to go do that work. I'm not saying political in a bad way, because that's just, big company nature. I just didn't want to do it. I just didn't want to deal with that. I didn't want to have to glad hand, or I didn't want to have to do X, Y, or Z. And so, you pass up on certain opportunities. And I've always said, I get the call from, I joke that I get the call from Google every 6 months. And my answer to them is the same every time, is great. I'm happy to come and have the conversation with you, but I'm only doing it if I get the number 2 job. And then the reason why I want to get the number 2 job is because I never want to have to deal with me having to go convince 17 people that this thing is worthwhile to spend time on. I just want to be able to say, we're going to go do this, and I can affect the whole thing going forward. Again, a little bit hubris, a little bit of arrogance on my part, but I also just don't want to deal with it. So I tended to gravitate to that side of the fence. I also like the energy in startups quite a bit. I like the autonomy that comes with them as well. So I tended to join the mid-stage startups or the earlier ones, so you can really influence it if you're good along the way. One of there's an old architectural saying is the architecture is that way because it got that way. And sometimes you can't affect it. I remember when I joined Microsoft, because of the canonical Ubuntu experience, I got into the Windows team. They wanted me to come in and talk about Windows. So I hadn't used Windows in about 10 years. So I quickly got a couple different machines and was using Windows, and I went and talked to them. And I said, okay, like a host of things I would do differently here. And you could see the resistance because it was 25 years of legacy. There's 10,000 people in the Windows organization, and there's all these reasons why something can't be done. And if you have the energy and the patience to go affect change on Windows, a $20 billion revenue line, it's a great opportunity. I just did not have that patience at that time, 40 years old, to go and do that anymore. So I think you just have to balance what you're actually after at that point. Understand what time horizon something could be effective in. Yes.
What kind of entry-level roles do you have?
What would be a good entry-level role? So I typically bias towards engineering side of the fence because I think it's a hard skill that people could really benefit from. I also think, I don't want to say project management or product management because those are really good big company positions tend to be in, but they tend not to be in startups. But basically anyone who can organize and get stuff done is invaluable. And there's a concept in the industry that Keith Rabois over at Founders Fund has said, which he calls them barrels and bullets. And I'm not exactly sure why he picked this, but barrels are people who you can almost blindly bet on, and bullets are people who are useful for getting stuff done. Whatever the skill set that you have is be a barrel, though. That is the thing. So be someone who gets stuff done, whether it be a project manager, a product manager, a designer, an engineer. Know, understand your skill set, how to organize people, how to get stuff done. Again, though, I think that typical entry-level roles that work out really well, designer or engineer tend to be the best two on the startup side of the fence. On an established side of the fence, product manager tends to be the one that a lot of very established companies lean on, or staff engineer, but that's not an entry-level role, but you get the idea, like someone who can affect an entire organization. Yes? Yeah, in what way? So, I mean, go back to what I said about those the four constraints in the world. People are what matter. But I think that one thing we've done in the industry is we over-oriented to this idea. Google released this thing a long time ago, and they said that what we look for in our program managers or product managers, these ideas of these shit umbrellas. Have you heard this term before? And there's this idea that this product manager or the PM or the tech lead is basically going to insulate the team from the rest of the organization. And I think that's actually quite wrong. What you actually have to build inside your team and the type of people is this resilience, this maniacal focus, this execution-oriented bent. So I do think the people what matter. Like any project could, you could have the best idea in the world and you fail to execute on it and it achieves nothing. You could also have the best idea with the best execution and it ultimately doesn't achieve fit either. So along the way, the people are going to be the ones that adapt that. So I do think it takes a little bit of both. I think like the product does matter. Like the Peter Levine from Andreessen Horowitz was one of the investors in GitHub. And I asked him what his investment thesis was in GitHub because of the execution problems with it. He says it was a cockroach product. Like literally the founders tried to kill it in 100 different ways and they couldn't. It was that viral of a success. So ultimately, the early team did a great job of building this viral product, and then they really messed up execution for about a 6-year period. So the product absolutely mattered, but the people, the first 10, 20 people really mattered to build that. And they locked into it, and they also built it at the same time. But then a different set of people had to come in and really ramp it up to a different level. So I wouldn't ever say it's like a binary, but I would say if I was going to orient to anything, if I could find the best people in the world, I like my chances of succeeding better in anything. Yeah, at that point, you're making almost blind bets on people. And if the product doesn't work, they're going to figure out what to do. If an incumbent comes in and out distributes them, they're going to figure out what to do. So at that point, it's about people. Yeah, for sure. You're looking for a couple of different things, but like that grit grind I mentioned before, resilience. Every day you wake up in a startup, something's broken. And it's this idea that you're just going to keep knocking that down along the way, every day, over time. And so somebody who's got that endurance to go and do that and adaptability. And you would, another way to flip this around too is like these hyper curious, constantly learning, imaginatively inquisitive people who along the way are just amalgamating all this information and every day getting 1%, 2% better. That's what you're looking for. Yes.
Share about your experience at Penn State. You mentioned how you always try to get internships to see how real software was like. So I guess what are some soft skills you recommend that graduates that university?
Well, I mean, I think the fundamentals in universities are still applicable, like the base algorithms and understanding software designs and things of that nature. Those are never going to go out of the way. You just understand that what you learned might not apply specifically in that same way, which is why I always hate those questions about, hey, take a linked list, reverse it, all that sort of stuff. Like I never had to do that once in my career, all the leak code type of stuff. Like it's not stuff I ever had to do. So I think that's one, but the other is show that you can complete something. A lot of people are very start oriented, but not completion oriented. So a lot of people have started writing a book but never finished it. A lot of people started an open source project but never released it. And so if you want to show any one thing coming out of college, have a couple open source projects or a couple of things that are live, and you can just point people to your GitHub repo and say, this is what it does. You know, this is the problem I was solving and what I did. You know, I wanted to, it's the easiest way to show that you can start and finish something. I think, yeah.
So over the years, you've spent a lot of time in leadership. Talked about recruiting. But once you have a job, what lessons have you learned? Are ways that you inspire the team to get the most out of it?
So what are the ways in which I can inspire the team? So this is, so there's no one right answer here. I have a style that I like and I feel comfortable with and that I've developed over the years, but it is also very different than what other successful people have also had from stylistic standpoints. So a classic one might be like, you know, Steve Jobs was notoriously an asshole, nitpicked very specific points, all that sort of stuff. And then there's people who are oblivious to details who have also had very successful careers and whatnot. And some people are like, they hammer their folks. They're almost brutalistic in their feedback, and they don't soften anything. And there's other people who are really like mentory along the way. And again, both of them can be successful. So it's all about finding an individual style. Now, my personal one and what I have done over the years is I've shown deep expertise in an area, but I've never tried to be in somebody's business. So I was like, I understand these systems. I understand all the back ends. I understand the distributed systems. I understand the products that we're building. So I have competence, but I'm going to trust that you all are going to do that. And here, I'm going to give you a big old grand vision for 5 or 10 years out, and I'm going to show you the sequencing in which we're going to get there. And then I'm going to try to rally us all via the simple human techniques. And if you ever want to know what it's like to get really good at leadership, my recommendation is you could do it in industry, but the easiest way to go do it is this: go start X outside of the industry. And the one I did is I started a bunch of basketball teams and leagues. And as odd as that sounds, running a team, like a sports team, and getting a whole bunch of weird personalities on the same page to, lose every single game in one season, to win 5 in the next, to win the championship in the third, is actually a really good understanding of what it takes to be a leader. And what your style is going to be. So like Bobby Knight, throw a chair across, he yells at his players and all that sort of stuff. But then there's, Steve Kerr with the Golden State Warriors is very, comforting and whatnot. You're going to find your own technique, but not any one specific one will work. But you have to be excellent at the one you pick.
So thank you. We're actually out of time, but thank you so much for talking to us and coming to Penn State. A huge round of applause for Mr. Warner.